Your book is titled Rebellion, and you say that's what Donald Trump's populist MAGA movement is about, Robert. For folks just learning about the book itself, what is it a rebellion against in your mind?
Well, it's against the founders' principles as articulated in the Declaration of Independence, the idea that all human beings are created equal with and enjoy natural rights, and that the role of government is to protect those rights. And I think that what we've seen really since the beginning of the republic has been always a significant number of Americans who have opposed those ideas. Certainly in the South, during the slaveholding years, they were opposed to the Declaration of Independence. After the Civil War, the South continued to, and others as well. And the driving force of the Trump movement, I believe, are people who would like to see a change in the system. Some articulate it directly, and some simply act on it.
Robert, when I'm like in the dog park on the weekend and I'm talking to regular educated people and I say something like, I'm concerned about the future of democracy, I'm concerned about the health of our democracy, sometimes they tell me I'm overreacting, or they say, look, there's nothing new in the sun here in Trump's MAGA movement, as you've pointed out in your book and just now. But how do you think, and do you think, that this moment in American society, American politics, is it different from the previous moments, and is it more dangerous?
It is more dangerous, and it's dangerous for two fundamental reasons. One is that this group that I've been talking about, the millions of Americans who I think are not happy with the way our system operates, and they are descendants of many millions of Americans in the past who are not happy with the way our government operates. For the first time in many, many decades, this group has taken control of one of the two political parties, which puts it in a much stronger position to accomplish its objectives than it has ever been in the past. It's usually been in a minority in one or both parties. Now it controls the Republican Party. So that is one problem. The other problem is Donald Trump himself, who is, he certainly follows a sort of typical mold of demagogic leaders that we've seen in the past, but he is also special in his willingness to disrupt the American system. And he's already demonstrated, and this is the thing that I don't understand why people don't see this, he's already demonstrated the desire to become a dictator, and not just in his statements, but in his actions. He attempted to annul and cancel the results of a Democratic election in which he lost. If he had succeeded, if Mike Pence had not shown some unaccustomed backbone at that moment, then he would have been ruling as a dictator. And I honestly don't know what Americans need to see in choosing their presidential candidate, other than that one of these two candidates has already attempted to overthrow the government. Are we going to give him another chance?
So, Robert, you said the word attempted a few times in that answer, and some might argue that our democracy held. I might argue that it was just sort of luck, because apparently a lot of things we thought were rules and laws were just tradition and people deciding they were going to behave. And you point out in your book that the founding fathers worried about, and Abraham Lincoln warned about, that many Americans just no longer care. They don't care whether the system survives. How would you compare, and you touched on this a little bit, the hardcore Trump supporters to, say, members of the Republican Party and elected officials who oppose Trump, but now they're saying, I'm going to vote for him, I'm going to vote for the Republican ticket? Who cares more here?
Well, the Republican office holders, as we can see, are just cowards. I mean, they don't want to be on the wrong side of a movement that seems to have taken over the party or is threatening to them. You've seen what happens to Republicans who defy the Trump movement, like Liz Cheney, like Adam Kinzinger. They're kicked out of the party. They're driven from the party. And so the rest of the Republicans have taken notice of that. And so they're basically just hiding, and they don't want to get into trouble by opposing Trump. And that's true for professional Republicans, both in and out of office, in think tanks, et cetera. They're just afraid. The more interesting question is, why is the average Republican voter who doesn't want a job in the next Trump administration, why are they willing to tolerate Trump? And I do think that gets to the question and the concerns that were raised by Thomas Jefferson during the Revolution, and also by Abraham Lincoln in his famous Lyceum speech of 1838, that, you know, our system depends on a real commitment on the part of everybody to the fundamental principles of the Declaration of Independence. And we know that there are people who are opposed to those principles, but what about everyone else? Are they willing to defend them? And I think I think right now there are many, many Republicans who seem to be basically indifferent as to whether our system survives or not. I actually don't believe them when they say they don't think there's a serious threat. I think they see what we all see, but they're willing to take that risk because they think they'll be fine. And I think that's true, unfortunately, of a lot of white Americans who think that, they're not going to be the target of this different type of regime that the people who are coming in with Trump want to create. And maybe they're right, but in any case, they don't have sufficient dedication to the liberal principles of the founding that have guided our country, or attempted to guide our country over 2 centuries.
You've written that Donald Trump, if reelected, would become the most powerful person to be president, in part because he would have the fewest constraints of any president ever before. So should Trump be elected, in what ways could the lack of constraints sort of manifest itself throughout his second term?
Yeah, and I think we need to, let's be clear about what Donald Trump is all about. I don't think he has a very interesting, fully developed ideology of being a dictatorship. He's going to be a dictator just because he wants what he wants, and he wants it when he wants it. And he's going to use whatever tools are at hand. And we saw some of that. People who served under him in his first term said that in particular, he loves to use the military because that is the one thing that any president has sort of unique control over. So he wants to use the military for all kinds of purposes. We're even seeing that he wants to, use the military to deport immigrants. So I think it's pretty clear what it is that he wants to do, why he wants to do it. And yes, I think we're seeing right now, for instance, obviously Congress is not going to be a check on him, especially if it's dominated by Republicans. And also I think we have reason to wonder whether the Supreme Court is willing to stand in his way, since there are clearly significant Trump supporters on the court, as they've shown in their handling of the immunity case, for instance. So we don't have a court to defend us. We don't have a Congress to defend us. So who is going to do that? I think he's going to have a pretty fair free reign when he's president if he gets elected again.
Robert, I just want to back up for a second, and probably should have started with this and just ask a really quick question. Sometimes when I talk about liberalism, the republic and the democracy, people think I'm using capital letters on that. Could you just quickly define what the liberalism that's in our founding, what you're talking about when you say liberalism?
Yes, and you're right. I mean, liberalism has been stretched to mean all kinds of things, but fundamental liberalism, small L liberalism, if you will, are basically embodied in the principles of the Declaration of Independence. It is about the defense of individual rights. It is the belief that all human beings are born with those rights. They're not granted by God. They're not granted by the Constitution. They're not granted by government. They exist as an inherent part of being humans. And the role of government, and in fact, almost the only role of government, other than protecting people in general, is to protect those rights. That is true liberalism. That is what people have opposed. That's what they're opposing now. Sometimes people want to say, well, it's woke, it's the left, it's communism, etc. But really what the objection to among that white hot core of Trump supporters is to the founders' liberalism.
You also write about the divided political landscape, one of bipartisan disgust with the political system in general in America today, resembling the years just prior to the Civil War. So just explain the parallels that you see here. And you also wrote about similarities with the political mood now to the political mood in the early 1930s in Germany, shortly just before Hitler took power. So if you wouldn't mind, just talk through that.
Sure. I mean, one thing that happened in the years before the Civil War was there was a kind of national sorting between the two parties. Up until that things began to break down, you had two political parties, the Whigs and the Democrats. They both had northern and southern wings. But as the issue of slavery got hotter, the disagreements got hotter and hotter. Basically, the parties, turned into a northern party and a southern party. The Whigs dissolved. So it was a national sorting so that, in a way, neither party could tolerate the victory of the other. That's how dynamically opposed they were. And we have seen a similar national sorting going on over the past few decades, where these anti-liberal forces that I'm talking about, which used to be divided between the two parties. There used to be the Southern Democrats who were anti-liberal from that perspective, and then there were white Protestant movements in the Republican Party who were anti-liberal from that perspective. And what's happened since the Reagan years, really, if not slightly before, is that all these anti-liberal forces have moved into the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party has basically been purged of its anti-liberal forces. So now you have this national sorting of people who are just diametrically opposed in their view of what the United States is. And that, I think, is a very hard problem to solve. It isn't divided as it was before the Civil War regionally between North and South. It probably is more between urban areas and rural areas. But in any case, the fundamental opposition of one side to the other has become pretty striking. And as far as Germany is concerned, I don't want to overstretch the analogy, but it is worth recalling that a lot of conservatives who wound up supporting Hitler did so because they were so worried and upset about communists who were, by the way, real communists in Germany at the time, as opposed to people that get called communists today. But their concern about the other guys was so great that they were willing to tolerate, if not even support, someone as dangerous as Adolf Hitler. And I think that, today you see Republicans railing about the communist Joe Biden and the communist Democratic Party again. And so I get a sense that, there's this sense that they can blame the fact that those people are so far to the left, which sort of gives them a permission structure to support someone like Donald Trump. And in that sense, I think the analogy is pretty clear.
Let's turn over to one of your other writings, an essay, in fact, last year that you wrote in the Washington Post about what you saw as an increasingly inevitable danger of a dictatorship under Donald Trump. That went viral, alarmed a lot of people. It also prompted the early release of this book. Also led Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance to write a letter to the Justice Department calling on the Attorney General Merrick Garland to investigate you for trying to incite an insurrection. Some colleagues of yours, they wrote that the move is a preview of what life would be under Trump presidency, trying to use the powers of the executive office to attack perceived enemies. So what did you make, I guess, of that entire situation that came out of all that?
Well, as I joked in response to Vance's statement, he was supposed to wait until after the Trump dictatorship to try to lock me up, but trying to do it now was probably premature. No, it gives you a sense of the mentality on the other side, this desire to silence critics, this desire to accuse critics of them breaking law. There's a lot of, I'm rubber, you're glue. In fact, of course, we know where the real threat to the republic is coming from. It's coming from Donald Trump, but Donald Trump supporters then try to deflect by trying to blame other people. But it is a harbinger of things to come. J.D. Vance could be vice president in a Trump administration. So I think people need to take seriously that the tendency of a lot of these Trump supporters is basically, as they like to chant, to lock people up.
So you also make clear, Robert, that much of our system as it stands depends on this upcoming election in November. And in your book, you also write that the long-term prospects for American liberalism are actually bright. Is that because Trump was defeated, or is there something else that you're seeing?
No, my view is that we are in a terrible crisis where things could go terribly wrong in 2024. Either, by the way, if Trump wins, and I think that would be a great danger to the republic and to our liberal democracy, but also if he loses, he's going to reject the election results. And I think the substantial, if not the totality of the Republican Party is going to support him, which is going to lead to all kinds of difficulties. But if we are able to get past this crisis, I actually think that the future looks better for the following reason. This group that is the sort of dominant core group of Trump supporters basically are white Christians, white Protestants, and as we know and as they know, they are a shrinking majority to the point where we're getting very close to having a minority majority or a majority minority country, however you want to put it. And so their ability to accomplish this objective that they're trying to accomplish now is going to be seriously diminished. Trump is also somewhat of a unique figure. We've never had a level of narcissism and selfishness in a political leader, and that's saying a lot historically. But even his closest supporters admit that he is a total narcissist and it's all about him all the time. And so if he is finally gone from the scene because he's lost in the election and he really can't run again, I think that for one thing, this movement might splinter and support different people, but also it's hard to replicate the relationship that Donald Trump has established with this group of people. It is as close to a fascist style of leadership that we've had in the United States.
And we also saw what Donald Trump did after the 2020 elections, working with supporters to drop alternate or fake slates of electors in several key states, challenging the validity of the vote counting process in those states. What are your concerns about Donald Trump and his supporters on Election Day, the weeks after? I mean, should he be behind in election results?
Yeah, no, I think that, he has not ruled out the possibility of violence in response to this. He doesn't claim he's going to incite it himself as he did on January 6th, but I think there's reason to believe that he would. And so I think, we can anticipate if he loses that he will try in every manner he has to try to prevent the election from being certified. And I'm interested, and whether certified or whether it's accepted as legitimate, I'm interested in some of the behavior that some of the Republican-dominated states might undertake in such a circumstance. Because, if you look at American history, especially in the 19th century, secession was a pretty common, whether it was attempted or actually carried out, it was a pretty common feature of American politics in those days. Our system hasn't actually changed that much since then. And so I could envision Republican-dominated states refusing to, for instance, recognize the Biden reelection just because Trump is insisting that he was robbed of the election. So there's all kinds of turmoil that could come even after a Trump defeat.
Robert, I just want to back up and ask a follow-up on about the future of the Trump party, if you will. If Trump doesn't get reelected and Trump, for some reason, is off the political stage, do you think that that's the end of the MAGA movement as it exists because the driving narcissistic force behind it is no longer on the stage? Or do you think it's a J.D. Vance, Donald Trump Jr., and the list goes on that may be able to capture some of that? I mean, is this going to be a political reality for us in elections in the future?
I mean, certainly, yes, because, as I say, and as I try to argue in the book, these kinds of people have always been present. It's just, have they been able to capture a political party, or how influential are they? They're more or less influential at various different times. So that group is going to continue to be there. I'm sure it will find various leaders looking to take over for Trump. I guess I'm suspecting that it won't be easy to settle on one leader in the same way that Donald Trump has been the one leader of this movement, so that they might split. But the trouble is going to be with us. And I think, getting to your question, there's a real question as to whether the Republican Party is viable in its present form after a Trump defeat. I think that the Republican Party in a Trump victory will become, even more the party of Trump and possibly the party of authoritarianism in America. But in the absence of Trump, it certainly is deeply split. We are seeing more people supporting Trump because he's the nominee than I think would normally do so. So I think the Republican Party may go the way of the Whig Party in the 19th century and split into its component pieces, with one, MAGA part of the party becoming its party, and then what I would like to call the constitutional Republican Party, the people who are devoted to the Constitution, becoming another wing of that party. But we could see the dissolution of the Republican Party.